Welcome to Table Talk, the show where business families share candid stories of growth, leadership, and legacy. I'm Matt Knight, your host and executive director with the Alberta Business Family Institute. Today's guest has been called the godfather of family offices in Canada. He spent 20 years with RBC and then left to build something that didn't exist in the market, but his family and others desperately needed it. That was back in 2003. 23 years later, Northwood Family Offices serves nearly 100 families and has pioneered a model of integrated advisory that's changed how wealthy families and advisors think about advice. He's also written 3 books and has taken on a new role leading thought leadership at the Ultra High Net Worth Institute. Today's episode will dig into really learning about the family office industry. We'll hear more about Tom's journey, and we'll think through about the changing landscape and what this means for your family or your advisory practice. So today I'm joined by Tom McCullough. Tom, welcome to Table Talk.
Great, thanks, Matt. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. So let's maybe start a little bit with your origin story. So as we, a little bit of my research and our conversation before, you kind of mentioned that you came to this as almost a frustrated consumer. So your family had some wealth and you wanted some support managing it, and you went looking for that coordination, that support. And what did you find?
Yes. So I had spent, as you mentioned, 20 years at Dominion Securities. So I was a financial person, let's say. And my parents had built some wealth, mostly through real estate. And we were looking for somebody to help the family, not in a vertical specialist way. We had those vertical specialists, accountants, lawyers, investment people, but in a horizontal, family-oriented way. How will we make these decisions? What things should we think about that we haven't thought about yet? And I couldn't find somebody who would do that. But then this is 25 or more years ago in Canada. So what we did is maybe the thing that most people would do is we said, well, let's go to our accountant. And this is an accountant my parents had dealt with for a very long time and had been there prior to the wealth and after the wealth. And I went and talked to him and said, we're looking for this kind of help. And he immediately jumped in and said, well, you can do an estate freeze, talk to this lawyer and this lawyer, and you can do a buy insurance on your parents. The conversation was about a minute long. And, what could he have said? He could have said, and he's a great guy, but he could have said, oh, interesting. Tell me more. How can I help? Why don't you and your dad and I have lunch and we'll chat about it? And, what are the questions you're wrestling with? What have you thought about so far? All sorts of conversation topics that would have, I think, helped. But instead, he gave me these 2 ideas. I assume he went back to filling in tax returns. And I went off and got a insurance quote, and talked to the lawyer, didn't like the lawyer. And so, I was this frustrated consumer. It's kind of like, is there not somebody who does this? And apparently there wasn't back in the day. And so I thought, and this is where the entrepreneur part comes in. I thought, it can't be that hard. It's a great idea. It can't be that hard. So I thought, well, maybe I should just go do this. I had spent 20 years at RBC, and a couple of things happened to me. One is the bank had taken over, and it was just a little bit less fun with a big organization. I also come from a family full of entrepreneurs. I've got 25 first cousins on one side of my family. Almost all of them are entrepreneurs. My dad was an entrepreneur. And I, so I thought, maybe this is the moment. Maybe I should just go and do this. And I did.
Awesome.
It was, and it was harder than I thought.
Yeah, it always is. So you had kind of that family entrepreneurial spirit. You had the problem, which is typical, needed for most entrepreneurs, and then you had the experience through RBC or Dominion Securities. Kind of from that inside view, like you could have found the best of the best within the bank or within the organization, but it still wasn't there from that organizational perspective. It sounds like. What was preventing the organization or these larger firms from going to that?
Oh, how much time have you got? I mean, everything. Culture, compensation, expertise. I mean, for example, the investment person who looked after me, one of the top investment people, I remember having lunch and with him, and he was telling me that he really liked REITs. He thought REITs were very good, real estate investment trusts, and we should add some REITs to our portfolio. And I thought to myself, most of our wealth is in real estate. It was built in with real estate, and you happen to like REITs, but it has nothing to do with my family's situation. We have too much real estate. So it's kind of like, people live and operate, even today, in the silos about which they are interested. But it may not be relevant to the family. And even if it is relevant to the family, it's not the only thing that's relevant to the family. What's relevant, that's why I talk about horizontal and vertical. The vertical people are very necessary, but you also need a horizontal person who connects the dots. Now, in some families, they have enough expertise themselves and experience and time and interest to do it themselves. And that's great if they want to do that. Or they've set up a single family office, or they've got another advisor who manages to have an integrated mind and help them out in these things. But most people don't. And they end up cobbling together these one-off, individual advisors who are very good on their own, but they don't connect the dots. And so I think that's, big organizations. I think they're starting to talk about it now, but it's still, people think about integration as just adding more services. Oh, we'll add aircraft service or bill pay or somebody to do governance. That's different than being an integrator that pulls all the parts of a family's life together on their behalf based on what they need, not based on the product that the firm has.
Yeah, and kind of both of those examples, so the kind of the firm model that you're talking about now and the accountant model that you started with, it sounds like they were trying to come up with a product solution to a people problem.
I think that's exactly right. And it's not evil. It's not like somebody set out to do something wrong. It's what they knew. They did what they knew. And what they knew was vertical. It's a little bit like, a general contractor versus an electrician. You need both of those people, but you do have to have both of them unless you're going to be, one or both of those people yourself.
And we'll get into that integrated model in a little bit.
Okay.
And before we get a little bit more into you building Northwood, let's maybe back up a second. So not all of our listeners will maybe know the distinction between a single family office and a multifamily office. Do you want to start with maybe a quick, very quick definition of both and kind of what you see the differences?
Sure. When I started this thing out, I didn't really know what a family office was. I was looking for this, firm that would help us pull all the parts together. And you look in the US and it's kind of like, oh, there's this thing called a family office. And maybe that's what we're talking about here. And in my early days, people asked what I was doing now after I left Dominion Securities. And I said, well, I'm starting a family office. And they said, oh, is that like birth control and family counseling? It's like, not exactly. So people didn't know what it was back in the day. But a family office is really an organization that helps play an integration role in a family's life, the sort of the point person, that general contractor role that pulls things together. But there's just so many different definitions. But one of the main distinctions is a single family office, which works for one family. So they are employees of that family. Oftentimes a family sells a business, they get a large load of liquidity, and they've never really done anything, had that much, cash before. So they hire staff, an investment person, a tax person, an administrative person to manage that and help them out with their family adjustments to that as well. But it's expensive because it's like having your own jet and it just sits there a lot of the time because you don't use it that much. So a number of years ago, I have no idea how many, 30, 40 years ago, maybe in the US, there was the invention of this thing called a multifamily office, and it's just shared among a number of people. It might be shared among 100 families like ours. It might be shared among, larger number, or it could be shared among 3 families. But a multifamily office just really shares shares the services among multiple families, and therefore it's cheaper. And it's got other benefits too, like, people often say to us, what do other families do? Well, we know what other families do because we're dealing with them. So there's lots of other benefits as well.
Okay. Actually, that's really good context. So, and it looks like you almost started trying to build that family office, and then the solution you built, regardless of what you want to call it, was almost more of that multifamily office model.
That's right.
So take us back to kind of 2003. You decide to leave Dominion Securities. You want to build this thing. People don't know what you're building. What did the pitch look like? How did you get families to join you? How did you get support? How did you get investors? I don't know if you had those. Like, what did you go through?
Oh yeah, it was tough. It was tough. About 2 years into it, I was thinking, well, probably before that too, I was thinking, what have I done? Because it was really hard to get people interested. And I was talking to one of my entrepreneur cousins, who said, yeah, my experience is about 9 years before an entrepreneur really kind of gets into the flywheel of it. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm at year 2. But I had a great partner. Scott Heyman is his name, and he's a CPA and had a lot of the actual technical skills that were required. But keep in mind, when I left Dominion Securities in a very friendly way, and I didn't have clients, and I was a senior exec there when I left and had no clients. So we started from absolutely zero. There was my family, and then we ended up with a very large family as our very first client. It's a long story. I don't think we have time for it today, but very good story. And they've been clients for 24 years. They've been with us the whole way. We've lived our life with them. But going back to 2003, we were building the plane while we were flying it, like a lot of entrepreneurs do. And we had the models of what they do in the US, so that was helpful. But, we really were cobbling it together. And it's not like you're doing one little piece of a job. You're kind of tackling everything. It's kind of like starting out as a general contractor. And, you have to know a lot about a lot of things. Now, we did because of our experience, but we didn't have clients and we didn't have all the setup and the technology and the portfolio systems. So we had to build that or, beg and borrow it. And then we had this, $100 million family who became our first client and still are today. And they were fantastic. And we kind of learned the mechanics of how to do this. We knew what to do, we thought, but how to do it, how to, operationalize it, that was certainly more challenging. And, it's a good thing in many ways that entrepreneurs don't think, like accountants and think about every pro and con. They kind of go for it out of passion sometimes, because if we'd really thought about it that way, there's enough difficulties to starting something like this in an industry that doesn't exist even in Canada. People didn't know what it was. Is that fees on fees and why would I need it? And so we were building an industry, not just a company. And so it was, but we had our, it's Wayne Gretzky. We had our eye on we're skating to where the puck is going to be. We thought that was the case. We didn't know, but listen, 23 or 24 years later, it's exactly what happened. Exactly where the puck is now is right in the heart of integrated family wealth management. And I think that's going to be that way for a long time to come.
Yeah, nice. Okay. And so you talked about that big client or the one family that came along, and then your family being kind of influential to the start. You said both of those are still with you kind of 23 years later. How important was it for you that you were building something for yourself and your family, not just for clients?
That's a great question. I mean, sometimes people think that, you get some kind of, perk or benefit, but it was probably the opposite for me along the way, because we would be last. We would always be last in line because you got to serve, I'll call them real clients first. But I think what it did, the benefit of being a client as well as CEO, is that it kept us very close to clients. We started this business out of need. It wasn't a fad, and it wasn't some fashion. Let's try this cool idea. It was like I talked to so many people who had all sorts of expert advice, but nobody to pull it together and nobody to help them think through, what was most important and how do we prioritize things and who's going to make sure it happens and how do we make sure if something happens to the main person who's driving the bus that everything will be in place for the next generation. And all that kind of thing. And so I think just having had the issues ourselves, and I think most families have those issues of needing coordination more than they even realize. I think it kept us very, very close to the client, and it wasn't a bunch of consultants, who came up with some kind of brainstorm. This might work. It was kind of like us really solving our own problem, and of course those of the early clients that came along because they were buying into the same issue. Oh my gosh, I didn't even know people like you existed. Thank you. We get that all the time. We had a client dinner the other night on kids and money, interestingly enough, was the topic. And it just devolved into this thing of how appreciative people are that there is a group that does this, because otherwise their affairs were scattered and they didn't have peace of mind. And so I just think it's all these years later, I just think I wake up every day feeling amazing about how we help families.
Nice. That was where I was going to go next. So we talked about kind of you building the firm, kind of that idea and the problem that started it. And then let's move on to kind of that framework, almost that general contractor method that you were talking about. So you talk about, kind of that GC, and then you have the plumbers and you have the electricians or the lawyers and the accountants, whoever's on your team. And Northwood is kind of that GC role. How does that work? What do you kind of do when you sit down with a new family? Like, how do you onboard them or explain that's kind of your role?
Yeah. And people come to us for a range of different reasons, at least at the beginning. There's usually some kind of catalyst in their life. It might be a health issue, health scare, and dad's controlled everything for a long time. And oh my gosh, we should sort things out. More often than not, it's a liquidity event. Somebody sold a business. The family's been, wealthy at some level, but not cash wealthy. So they've never had $300 million before and then have no experience dealing with that. So that's often how people come to us. And sometimes people come saying, I want you to manage my money. And so, which, we do, that's part of what we do, but it's only one part of what we do. And people often will say, well, what would an asset mix be for a family like ours? And our answer is, I have no idea. I don't know a thing about you. Lots of firms might volunteer an asset mix, but I think it depends entirely on the family and their situation. So we don't get to asset mix until we're further into the relationship, where we have done deep due diligence on the family to understand what it is that they need and their situation. So the actual mechanics of onboarding is, once somebody agrees to become a client, we have a letter of engagement that lays out fees and services and so on. And then the first thing we do is we give them a list of documents that we want. And if it was all in actual paper, it would be, a foot or two deep. And that's wills, powers of attorney, investment statements, insurance policies, marriage contracts, directorship agreements, every piece of paper. And we read them all. And nobody's ever read all their documents in one sitting before. So just by doing that, we get an amazing insight into the family. And we'll ask questions, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And oftentimes they don't know. They'll say, well, talk to my accountant or my lawyer, and they'll give us permission. We'll talk to the other advisors often and get the background and the input. And then the second thing we do after reading the documents is we have a deep discovery meeting with the family. And and it's often, in our case, it's often a husband and a wife, because it's often first generation wealth. We have inherited wealth, but a lot of it is entrepreneurs that have, built a business and sold it. So we'll talk to the couple, and we ask questions about the information they've given us, but we ask a whole series of questions as well. And one of my favorite questions is, what are the best 3 things you've done for yourself and your family in the last 12 months? And we wait an uncomfortably long period of time until both members of the couple answer the question. They're not always the same answers. But the interesting thing is that they're rarely about money. It might be, we sold the business, but beyond that, it's usually, we got the whole family together finally. First time since COVID, we were all together and we went to wherever we went to, Mexico. And then we asked the question, how do you want to answer that question 12 months from now? And they begin to think about it. And it takes some time. Those are hard questions. But what we're doing in that is we are helping to train them early on in the relationship to realize that the goal here is to help them meet their goals. Some of those goals cost something, so there's a financial implication to them. Some of them don't. Some of them don't cost anything. But instead of maybe they came in thinking, I need to beat a certain index with my investments. I mean, that investments are a very important part of the process, but they are one part of the process. And the main issue is, what are you trying to accomplish? And often, I would say, there's often tears in those meetings because, people think about things that are fundamental to them, and they don't think about them day to day. They think about what's in the paper, what they should ask, what's in the newspaper. But rather, what we're trying to do is help them think about what really matters to you as a family. How do we build a whole program to make sure those things have a very high probability of happening? And then life goes on. We produce a 50 or 60 page report that's completely customized to that family. And we go through it, and then we basically begin the process. We meet every family quarterly at least, and then there's lots of conversations in between.
So there's two things that you said there that I want to kind of unpack a little bit.
Sure.
The first one is, you kind of mentioned you're the first one that goes through all these documents, whether it's from the lawyers or the accountants, and then you ask questions, you poke deeper, and often you have to go back to those lawyers and accountants. And I can imagine that must be a difficult process, especially because you're going to those folks who are experts in their domain, and they're probably feeling a little bit defensive if you call and say, hey, I'm working with this family now. I want to know why you did this. How do you do that in a way that's productive, that respects those experts for what they contribute while also serving the family?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And as you can imagine, we don't go to people that way. We, really what we're doing at that stage is, and the family will send a note or call the advisor and say, we've hired this, Mr. Electrician, we've just hired this general contractor. So it's positioned as two completely different jobs. We are nowhere near as knowledgeable in their area. Let's just say it's a lawyer in their area as they are. So we're working with them like a general contractor work with an electrician. You're the expert. We just wanted some background on where this came from. I see the family's got 3 trusts. Can you tell us the background of why you didn't just use that one trust to do these other things? And they'll explain the details. Now, it may be that some of those people do feel a little bit concerned at the beginning, but usually those concerns are allayed after several meetings because they know we're not trying to take their jobs. We don't do those things internally. And unless they're terrible at their job, which most people are not terrible that we come across, we're going to have a great relationship. And the other thing could happen too is if we find that they're great, we'll often refer business to those people. I mean, there's no money that changes hands or anything, but if they're good, we find lots of our great advisors through existing client relationships. So I would say at the beginning, yes, there might be a little bit of concern on their part, but it's pretty quickly allayed. And also because while we're not as expert as them, we can speak their language. We've been them. Many of us have been them in the past, but we've given up our electrician job to be a general contractor full time.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the other part that I wanted to go into is, you mentioned you're helping the family with some of those softer things, whether it's goals, whether it's, the family connections and relationships. And, the model that you're working in, or the wealth management industry, if you want to silo it as that. And I know that family office or multifamily office world is a little bit more indifferent. And I'd probably get in trouble if I don't ask this question, but I know it's also a hard question to ask. How do you charge for things like that? Like, how do you set up the relationship so that you have the flexibility to meet those hopes and dreams and still be able to make sure that the firm is compensated?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. We charge essentially we come up with a fee based on what we think the amount of work is going to be. In the earlier days, it was harder to guess. These days, it's easier to guess because we've been doing it for 23 years and we've gotten good at it. But it's either some percentage based on their investable assets as a guideline because people want guidelines, but oftentimes it's a flat fee. We'll say this amount of work we think is this amount of money. And then we say, let's sit down in 18 months after 18 months after beginning the relationship and evaluate it. Make sure you're getting value. We're getting fairly paid for the amount of work because things change. There's scope creep often. Almost every client says, we're not that complicated. Pretty much every client says, we're not really that complicated, along with we don't spend that much. Those are the two main ones, neither of which is true in most cases. And so we'll sit down in 18 months and we'll evaluate the amount of work we're doing. And if things have changed and adjust the fees if necessary. Often we don't adjust the fees because we've been pretty good at guessing. But we have adjusted fees up and down depending on the need. Well, I'll just give you one example. It may be that the client family has decided, within the first 18 months they've got more time in their hands and they're looking at a lot more direct private deals to invest in. And so they want us to review them, and we don't pitch deals to clients. We're not in the business of evaluating and pitching deals, but we sit on the same side of the table as the client and we'll help them, evaluate them. We always think there's three categories to deals. One is, are you going to do this anyway? Regardless of what we say. And those ones we just try and help protect them as much as possible. Two is, do you not want to do this, but don't want to tell your friend that you're not going to do it? Well, we can handle that for you. Or three, do you really want some help evaluating this? But if they're doing a lot of those things, that's a ton of work on our part. So we would come back to a family like that and say, that really wasn't in the scope that we charged for. We're going to charge you more, or charge you for that. But typically, we don't charge hourly. We don't charge based on product. We're essentially charging on our estimate of the amount of work and something that's fair among clients. So if you were a client and you disclosed all your details to somebody else, which of course you'd never do, you'd want both those people to say, yeah, that's probably fair relative to the amount of work we do. So it's anyway, that's how we charge, and it's
so kind of more retainer based than
it's
percentages.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and we don't want to charge hourly for sure, because we don't want to dissuade people from calling us. We are the main point of contact. We're the touch point. Most people, when they have a question, they're not quite sure which professional they would be calling, so they call us. And we help them figure it out. We either do it for them or we help get it done for them. So that's that. And you don't want that done on you don't want the person thinking, oh, I wonder if I should, spend the hour talking to the person that I'm going to get charged for this. It's just, no, it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. And then if it's wrong, then we adjust it every couple of years.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like your GC analogy. Like you're never going to not call your GC to ask a construction question on a project, because you need to know, schedule and scope and all of those types of things.
You got it.
So you've been doing this for a while, lots of different conversations. You said it's evolved a little bit. What have you seen change? Like what are families coming with today that they're not? Like what's stayed the same? What's different? What's shifted?
Well, one thing that's shifted is there are more family offices, or more people calling themselves family offices. So it went from being us having to tell people what a family office is before telling them about Northwood. And now we get people keying into ChatGPT what they're looking for, and our name pops up and they contact us. And then we also have to say, who else are you seeing? And they list 6 firms, 5 of which are not family offices, at least in any description I would understand. They sell insurance, or they're accounting firms, or whatever it is. But people use the multifamily office term because it denotes or connotes ultra high net worth families. So that's one thing that's changed. So it makes the conversation with families I'd say a little bit more confusing because it's sort of a buyer beware thing for clients. They have to really do some work to figure out if they're getting what they are hoping they want. Another thing I would say is families are more global than they used to be. Kids go to university elsewhere. They marry people from other jurisdictions. There's all sorts. People move for work. People have homes elsewhere. I guess that part hasn't changed, but it's definitely a more global world. There's more people who move to Canada as immigrants, and their families are, elsewhere. So they just have to be much, much more globally aware. You don't have to be fluent, but you need to be conversant. And so we find that, there's a lot more awareness to have there. And another thing that's happened is, there are more wealthy families. I don't know what the number is, but one of the studies I looked at recently said there's two different studies, say between 15 and 20,000 people in Canada that have net worth of 30 million or more, which would be our target market. And we're probably the leading independent firm, and we have 100 clients, 105, I think, as of today. So it's a massive market for us, we think, from 100 clients to 20,000 eligible clients. And that number is growing. And, there's all sorts of implications of the gap between rich and poor. But the fact is there are more and more and more wealthy families. So that's another factor. And maybe one more I'll just mention is the complication of within the families is higher. There's, merged marriages with merged kids. There's just, all sorts of issues within families. It's just a more complicated world, what's married, what's not married, the rules are different in every province. So I think and then, it's a complicated world. Look at all the news these days on kids and cell phones and mental health crisis and geopolitics. It is a complicated world. And so people are, that just adds to life complication. So I think all of those things, and the world is the world is a more complicated world from a financial standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint. So I think the need for somebody to help navigate that for most families, not all, but for most families, is only going to increase. And so I think that the Wayne Gretzky puck analogy is still extremely relevant. I think that the role of an integrated advisor is key and growing. I wrote a piece called "The Rise of the Integrated Advisor" for the Journal of Wealth Management. You can just Google that and it'll come up. I think it's on our website. But it talks about instead of somebody doing integrated advising off the corner of their desk, my argument is that it's actually going to become a profession, like a general contractor. Yeah.
So that's kind of some of the transitions and changes you've seen in your clients. Let's talk a little bit about the transitions in your own life. So you're still the chair, you're still the founder. I believe now you're founder and chairman, but you're no longer CEO.
Correct.
Talk about that. How did you feel about that transition? What drove that?
Yeah, well, we made a decision, my partner and I, my business partner and I, a long time ago, that we wanted Northwood to last well beyond us, partly from a client standpoint, because if you engage a family office, you don't want to change. It is very complicated to change. And, this is a group that knows all of you, institutional memory and, everything. So you want it to be around long term. So if clients want to stay with you, which most of them do, you're there to be there for them. So that means you have to have proper succession. So we spent a lot of time thinking about succession. We did have an interesting situation in Canada because when we started the business because there weren't a lot of other family offices, multifamily offices for sure, you couldn't poach from other firms to find your staff. So we had to grow our own. So we would get, a 4-year experienced CPA from one of the big accounting firms and bring them in. They had a tax background, but we would teach them the other things. They would get their CFP or their CFA or whatever to learn the other things of life, and we would teach that to them over the course of time. And that's definitely worked well. But so I don't know. I think I just think it's just remind me of where you're going with the question, and let me narrow.
Yeah, I think you answered a lot of it. It was more about what kind of drove the transition and you passing the torch, and
Right.
how did you feel through that process?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. That's right. So part of the transition and succession process is making sure that you have the right kind of people and train them well, but also that they have the opportunity to lead. So we wanted to step back from day-to-day leadership while we were still around. And think about that in a family situation too. Instead of waiting till mom or dad passes away and then everybody, oh my gosh, now what are we going to do? We wanted to do the opposite. We wanted to step back, let the next generation lead, yet still be around, and maybe be around for 10 or 15 more years, but doing the things that we like and that are valuable to the firm. So working with clients and helping bring new families in and that sort of thing. So that's what we're doing. And I expect to be involved long term, but I'm not doing performance reviews anymore. And it gives the opportunity for the next generation to lead and step up. And we also wanted to make sure that they owned a piece of the business. We've got about, I think, 10 employee shareholders now.
Okay, nice. So it was more of a proactive succession story, almost like the same advice you would give your clients. Yeah. Today's episode of Table Talk is supported by Bennett Jones. If you ever need a law firm that understands family business and the complexities of running a family business, please check out Bennett Jones. We like to do kind of halfway through the episode, a little bit of a lightning round. So these are really quick answers. You can't think too much about them. So 5 questions, short answers, like 30 seconds each, no more, not even 30 seconds, 15 seconds.
15
the
seconds.
first one I'm going to steal from you earlier. What's the best thing you've done for yourself in the last 12 months?
Built trails on our back acreage. I got 5 kilometers of trails.
Nice. Is that a photo of it in the background?
No, it isn't. But that's one of my favorite young artists, Peter Rotter.
Nice. Okay. So best piece of financial advice that you ever received?
No debt for consumption. Don't have debt to consume. Different for university or for starting a business, but don't borrow to spend.
Okay. What's one thing that, ultra high net worth families or wealthy families often get wrong?
They spend way more time and money preparing the money for the heirs than they do preparing the heirs for the money.
Yep. Excellent. Okay. And then you can't use the same answer, but what's kind of one thing that you think, average families or most, like any family in Canada could benefit from that you work with your 100 families on, that would be an easy thing for them to implement pretty quickly?
Start with goals and invest based on specific goals.
And then you also teach some MBA students, I think, at Rotman. What's kind of one of the lessons that they've learned from you that kind of surprises you the most?
Rotman is a fairly corporate school, so I always tell them that most of them probably won't be my clients because you've got to take some risk and be an entrepreneur to make serious money on average. There's exceptions, but so I always make sure they know that I put a plug in for entrepreneurialism.
Yes. Okay. What's the biggest thing that you've learned from that experience as a teacher or professor in the classroom?
That's a great question. I've learned a lot of things. I would say how to communicate in a way that people will both understand and embrace passionately. So it's not just info, but it's something that can you translate it in a way that will move them. And I've learned how to do that.
Okay. So we kind of learned how to be more inspirational and
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Okay. So looking a little bit at kind of the Canadian landscape, the future, where do we think kind of the family office market and things like that are going in Canada? So you've said that, there's lots of other family offices out there now. Depending on the definition, that number changes drastically. What's really happening? Like how many multifamily offices do we have in Canada? What does that look like?
And maybe I said there's lots of other family offices out there, but there really aren't lots of multifamily offices. There's lots of single family offices, and single family office can be everything from, the receptionist helping out balancing your checkbook through to, Woodbridge for the Thompson family. It could be, anything really that helps a family apart from the operating business. Multifamily offices, Canadian Family Offices magazine says there's about 80 multifamily offices in Canada. I think there's about 5. So, and the issue is definition. And their definition is people call themselves a multifamily office. And if you look on their website, there's some services other than investments. So I don't think that's the definition of a multifamily office. I think there's probably 5. Maybe 10 if you stretched it. It's obviously there's no clear definition and no licensing or accreditation that makes you a family office or not. But there's more and more people interested. And I think it's because more and more families are interested. But I think it's really hard to do. So you can say, you can add more services, but that doesn't make you an integrated family office. That makes you a company with more services than just investments. So it's a challenge for the end client to figure it out, I'd say.
And then what about, Canada compared to the US or Europe? What do we have to learn? What are we doing well?
The market is much bigger in the US for multifamily offices, because they don't have the dominant banks that we do in Canada. So the banks suck up a lot of the area that, might be served by a multifamily office. And in Europe, I think, it's been a lot of the private banks that have been doing those kinds of roles. But I think I see a lot more multifamily offices emerging. But still, you scratch the surface and somebody says they're a multifamily office. And often you look at it and really they're an investment firm. But they use the term because it's attractive for high net worth clients. So I don't know, I just think it's really hard for clients to find what they really want. And so I guess we're going to get to it, but part of my role with the Ultra High Net Worth Institute is one of the goals of the Institute is bringing some clarity and help to the ultra high net worth families who are trying to sort through this morass of marketing and different regulatory regimes and so on and so forth to find out what it is that they need and want and where to get it.
Yeah. Okay. And then kind of Alberta and Western Canada, there's not a lot of kind of, multifamily offices that are based here. We kind of have, the ones from, Toronto and Eastern Canada and then Vancouver, and all of them are, starting to kind of come in and be a little bit interested. What does Alberta have to do to catch up? What are the opportunities for Albertan families and Albertan advisors?
Well, we've got a couple of key staff from Alberta, and they are dedicated to opening an office in the West, very soon. I think we'll open. Certainly, we'll open an office in 26 or 27 in the West. And I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. We happen to be located in Toronto, but we serve clients all over the country. We have clients everywhere in the country. And I think it's amazing. People who live an hour away from Toronto don't want to drive into Toronto, so we deal with them mostly on Zoom. Because they don't want, or we'll go to them as well. So I think, that whole thing has cut down the impact of distance. But I think there's just the whole idea of being culturally aware as well and being sensitive to regional issues and so on. But because we've got quite a number of staff from the West who are in leadership roles, we've got a real dedication to boosting our focus in the West generally.
Nice. So one of the things I hear from a lot of the families that we work with is, they're in the stage where they're starting to build out the structure for a single family office. What would your advice be to them?
Well, it's interesting. I'm just about to do co-lead a course called it's put on by Cambridge Forums, and it's called the Masterclass in Family Office Designs. And it's that question exactly. Should you have a family office or not? And if so, what kind? Or should it be a combination? Single, multi, virtual, some hybrid of all of those? So we're wrestling with those issues right now. I think it depends. If you're thinking single or multi, I think one is, what's the purpose of it? Is it like, what is the main role of the family office? Who is it serving? Are you a very large family that is going to need, intense service for 25 households, et cetera, et cetera? Or on the other hand, are you a more straightforward family? You've sold your business for $300 million. There's a couple and 3 adult children and 5 grandchildren and so on and so forth. So I think there's sort of the complexity factors that make a difference there. A lot of it is personal, I'd say, in terms of either ego, I want my own family office, or confidentiality, although I don't know why it's more confidential than a multifamily office. It really isn't very much. I think the biggest difference really is cost. And if you want your own thing, it's going to cost you, $1 million and up. Easily. $1 million that's probably $2 million, because just think about, the staff. If you are going to have 3 staff, an investment person, a CEO, and 2 admin people, say. I mean, just in staff costs alone, that's going to be, $1.5 million there, plus all of your other costs. So for a multifamily office is certainly going to be less than half that cost on average. So people used to think, so some of that is related to size. If you're a $20 billion family, then the cost of a family office, the fixed costs of a single family office get amortized over a lot of dollars. So it's probably, reasonable cost. But I think anything below $1 billion is just extremely expensive to do a single family office. But you can if you want to. It certainly can be done. It's just, are you willing to pay that number? The other benefit, I think, of a multifamily office is, as I said before, you get to see what other families you get to hear what other families are doing. And so that can be beneficial. And then there's also the buying power of multiple families coming together to get things cheaper. So, there's pros and cons, and we're not trying to, what you don't want to do is slot people into the wrong spot. So you want to really help them figure out what the right spot is for them early on. What I do see a lot more of now is hybrid. So a family may have 2 people in-house, a bookkeeper that's going to keep the day-to-day stuff going and writing checks and so on. And maybe they have a family education person, but the other things they want to outsource, or vice versa. And so, or you've got some family members who really want to get involved. They've got a multifamily office, but we hive off a certain amount of investments or a certain, the foundation or something, and they take that over. So there's a lot more blurring, I would say, between multi and single family offices, which I think is probably good. Each family can adapt to what they need.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. So let's move into the Ultra High Net Worth Institute. I'm not even going to try to make that into an acronym. Tell me more. You said you're just trying to professionalize and give a little bit more definition in the space. What are you working on there? What does this evolution look like?
I've been on the board of the Ultra High Net Worth Institute for about 6 or 7 years. It's been around for, I think, about 7 years. And its genesis is interesting. One of the founder of it, a guy named Steve Prestano, who's been in the ultra high net worth space for a very long time, organized a panel at a conference, and he got a number of his colleagues to be on this panel about how ultra high net worth families can access the services and issues they need dealt with. And at the end of the panel, all the panelists, they came from different backgrounds. One was from trust, one was from bank, one was an RIA, which is like a portfolio management firm, one was from a brokerage firm and whatever. And they were saying, this is complicated for people. It would be great if we could help families figure out more, easier access. And so that was really the beginning of the Ultra High Net Worth Institute. Could we create a not-for-profit think tank that helps professionalize and clarify and build the industry in the ultra high net worth space? And there really wasn't anybody doing that. So this is a group that is creates content, helps bring standards, professionalism, education to the people that serve ultra high net worth families. And I would say one of the core elements of the Ultra High Net Worth Institute is this idea of integrated wealth management. How do you connect all the dots? So when I stepped down from being CEO at Northwood, I had a little bit more time on my hands and was just starting in January of 2026. I became it's a part-time role there, but the head of thought leadership and strategy, which is really just an extension of the work I've been doing at Northwood for all these years, just for a broader audience beyond the US. And we are, developing training and credentialing programs for people in this field, in the ultra high net worth field. And by the way, that crosses, it's not just investment or tax or estate. It includes governance and, family well-being specialists and next gen specialists and, people who work on it with trustees. So anybody who touches, ultra high net worth families in that way can be part of this. And it's a very, very stimulating organization. It's very good, high quality people. Like any organization you might join, often it's the people who are there already that you look at and go, I want to be with those people. They are smart, thoughtful, high integrity people. So it's, I've loved it.
Nice. And, whether it's work that you do through them or kind of the courses and thought leadership that you've done through Northwood, a lot of it, and we've come to it a couple of times, you talk about the education that's required for the next gen. What works there? What doesn't work? What do we need to see? Like, what can universities be doing better to educate, students and whether they end up in one of the families or as an advisor? What does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I've taught at the University of Toronto for 15 years in the MBA program, a course called The Management of Private Wealth. And in the early days, I would always ask students, why did they choose this course of all the electives they have? And in the early days, they chose it because it was the closest thing to personal finance course in the MBA. Now that's different. I think many people still choose it for that reason, which begs the question, why don't we have a personal finance course in the MBA? But what a lot more people now see private wealth as a career area. I'd say it was zero in the early days, and now it might be 20% of the class, maybe 25% of the class, which is quite a big change. And that's at a school that's pretty consultant and investment banking oriented. So yeah, it's I was just doing a little ChatGPT search the other day on schools in the world, mostly North America, that are most advanced in the family wealth management programs. And there really isn't a lot. It's very interesting. Even at this stage, there's a lot on family business, but not much on family wealth, whether you have an operating business or not. And so it's interesting that the Ultra High Net Worth Institute has sort of, it's a quasi-academic organization, academics and practitioners, but we're developing content and we've got curricula. And so we're acting a little bit like a university because, well, partly because there are not a lot of university type programs. So I think there's an opportunity for universities to step into that field. Usually the programs that are out there are investing or family business or, other things like that, but not so much on integrated wealth, where you integrate not just the technicals, but the non-technical aspects as well. So that's what I do for a living, but there's still not much training on it. So we do most of our training internally for the firm, and we will rely increasingly on people like the Ultra High Net Worth Institute to help us with that.
Yeah, and that's, at the University of Alberta too, we have, family business course that we've been running for decades. We have, and then we have an advising family business course, but we don't have anything that's specific in that wealth space. And 70% of our graduates are typically finance and accounting and investment banking. So it's an interesting gap to think about.
And I think somebody could fill that. Like, I think there's a need for it for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. Excellent. So one of the questions I like to keep on almost every episode of Table Talk is around, for your clients, for your family members, for your friends, if you're going to recommend a book to them, what is it going to be and why? Or what book changed your life the most? And if you say one of yours, that's okay, but I'm going to ask the question again.
Well, I don't know if it changed my life, but it's the book I recommend the most. Let's just say that. And it is called Made to Stick by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. And those guys are fairly prolific business authors. And I just find that there is so much communication in the world, way too much, in my opinion. Everything from marketing to social media to things that are true and not true. And oh my gosh, it's so much. And out of all of those things, a few things stick. In our day, what are those things? Why do they stick? And we're all in the communication business at some level, in our business or to our spouses or to our children or others or students. What makes ideas stick versus not stick? And they tell a great story at the very beginning of the book. People could, if they're interested, it's just a great story that explains story A and story B, and one of them sticks and one of them doesn't, and it's a worth a read. So just Google it and see what the intro story is.
Interesting, yeah. Because typically I know all of the books and have read all the books that people recommend, but I have not read that one. So
all right, well, that's why I kind of went a little different direction, and it's. So anyway, I find it great. They've written some other terrific books as well, but this one is, and essentially I will tell you the 6 elements that make a story sticky, if I can remember them properly. One is it's short. It's let's see here. It stands for success. SUCCES. I should use you remember it. It's there's something unexpected that happens in it. It's concrete, it's credible, it plays on your emotions in some way, and it's in the form of a story. And all of those things often will make an idea sticky versus not sticky, and it's helpful in every aspect of life.
Nice. So we didn't get much into it today, but speaking on the emotion piece, in some of the things that you've written and some of the other podcasts you've been on, you talk more about, kind of your father's influence and, how that has kind of, built your humility and your, grace and part of your legacy. When we think about the legacy that you're building, and people often find this as like, well, I still have lots to do. Like it's not you can have a legacy at any age. What do you hope, your legacy or the Northwood legacy is in 20 years from now?
Great question. There's in one of my books, Wealth and Wisdom, the top 50 questions wealthy families ask, there is one of the contributing authors talks about legacy. And the idea is that we are all building legacy every day. It's not just a thing you leave. You are building your legacy. And she said, if you are brave, ask your heirs, your children, what is the legacy that they see you building? If you like it, great. If you don't like it, and you're still alive, obviously, to ask that question, you can change it. You can begin to change it. So I had the experience of doing that. I was actually doing a podcast interview with this author. Thayer Willis is her name. And I thought, oh, she's probably going to ask me if I've ever done this. And I was having breakfast with my son the day before. This is probably 10 years ago. And so I thought, well, I'll do it. I'll ask him. And we had a fabulous conversation about life and love and what's important and what we mean to each other. And, it's just fantastic. So I don't know, what's my legacy that I would like to leave? I am very interested in helping people um, better understand what they need and have a game plan to get to it. It sounds maybe a little bit clinical, but it's just there's so many people that do things randomly. They poke at them and they don't step back and say, well, what are we trying to do here? There's this thing called goals-based investing. And I was on a panel and somebody was talking about this new concept called goals-based investing. And I said, like, I think about that as oxygen-based breathing. Like, how would you actually invest really without goals? And people do it all day, every day. So I'm a big believer in before you jump in to do something, identify what your goals are. And it just makes everything clear. So that's a very concrete piece. If I can bring that component to anything I do, I like to do that. The other thing, there's dozens of things I could say in this topic, but the other one, and I would say this is a legacy I would like to leave, not because I'm good at it, but because I think it's good for the world. And that is the two words that you mentioned about grace and humility. And I often think that, when we meet people on the street or talk to somebody and get, perhaps an angry reaction to something, or have or on a phone call with somebody and, there's some difficult reaction, instead of writing that person off, viewing that interaction with a little bit of grace and rather wondering, oh, I wonder what happened to them today that brought that response. And can you just imagine what our world would be like if we all practiced that just a tiny little bit? I don't know. It just would be amazing. And so I'm not great at it, but I think about it a lot and I try to practice it where I can. And I'm hoping that's one of the legacies that I've left at Northwood. And the best way to figure out legacy is ask somebody other than the person who's in the process of leaving the legacy, and ask the others who deal with them regularly what is the actual legacy they're leaving.
Yeah, nice. So I plan to end here, but I want to end with another question that also comes from you that you mentioned earlier on. What is the best thing that you're going to do for yourself in the next 12 months? And you told me I had to make an awkward pause here, so we're doing that for effect.
Yeah, awkward pause here. I have stumbled into a sort of a therapy modality called internal family systems. And it's kind of like, it says, like a family has many parts, there's many parts inside us as well. And I won't go into all the gory details. It's been around for 25 years. I just never heard of it. But it's kind of like a different way of operating, maybe a little bit of that grace and humility. And instead of, when you have an interaction with somebody, you react to them rather than understanding it might just be a part of them. And so one of the things I'm going to do for myself this year, I've started this process already, but I'm going to spend more time understanding that, because the little bit of exposure I've had to it in the last 2 months, it has been a complete eye-opener for me that there is a different way of operating that I have operated, on the basis of which I've operated for the last 60 years. And this looks interesting. So that's probably not an answer you've gotten from anybody else ever, but that's something I'm going to do for myself because it leads to health. And when you actually look at it, it's quite straightforward. It's not weird in any way, but it's just one of those quarter turns in life that you kind of go, oh my gosh, this is a different way to operate. So that's one of the things I'm going to do for myself, and I'm looking forward to it.
I wasn't expected that. And maybe that's why you haven't used the word retirement, because you're still so focused on these other initiatives.
No, I am not a good retiring person.
So, Tom, thank you very much for this. It was awesome to have a conversation with you and share it with our listeners. Not often that I get to talk to someone who's had this much experience in kind of the ultra high net worth and family office space. So really appreciate that. Love the firm and the frameworks that you've built over the last 23 years, and really appreciate your time. And sharing. So listeners, if Tom's insights on family offices, integrated advisory frameworks, and next-gen preparedness, related or resonated, or you're thinking about your family office, share this with someone that might need the conversation or might be able to learn from it. To learn more about Northwood Family Office, visit northwoodfamilyoffice.com. To learn more about ABFI and how we support business families here in Alberta and across Canada, visit abfi.ca. And to connect with me, you can email me at matt.knight@ualberta.ca or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow Table Talk in your favorite app or on YouTube so you never miss an episode. Share it with other business families. Once again, I'm Matt Knight. Thanks for joining Table Talk. Have a wonderful day.